Hi, this is Eternal King here, bringing you another gaming video today. So we are looking at Ni no Kuni, the White Witch. And the thing you'll know about me is that while I was a gamer during peak nostalgia era, essentially PS2 generation, a lot of my favorite games actually still exist during that Xbox 360, PS3 era of game development. That's just naturally the case with me, where I think that it was this sort of perfect middle ground between graphical
Slow down, Mr. Drippy.
between graphical innovation and a commitment to gameplay.
Huh?
It's just a perfect middle ground between like PS2
Huh?
and then obviously sort of the ray tracing particle orgasms that we call gaming today on PS5
do?
and Xbox Series X. And we see this kind of coming to a head with the most recent Dragon Age
Hey,
game.
wait for me!
I don't know if you've been following the news on Dragon Age Veilguard, kind of
So
what's
this
happening
is
with that title.
your
But the
world.
reception's been exceptionally divisive.
A whole nother world. Beautiful, isn't it?
You essentially have a BioWare game that doesn't feel like a BioWare game. It doesn't feel like a BioWare game in terms of its writing. It doesn't feel like a BioWare game in terms of its characters. And visually, it would look more like a Forspoken or Forsaken, sort of title. Kind of like an open world, shiny, new-gen Ubisoft game, as opposed to a BioWare game, where the visuals are gritty and dark and bloody and even, I think, the beauty of something like Mass Effect is that even though it was a sci-fi space game, it wasn't a very shiny sci-fi space game. It was very gritty in the way it presented things. The Gek, the alien races, everything was just like slightly gross with its presentation of a sci-fi world. It was not, a Star Trek or a Star Wars. It was not crisp and clean in its presentation. So that really contrasts with the like of Dragon Age Veilguard, because it is, essentially the opposite of what a traditional BioWare game is. It's not Baldur's Gate 2 where you wake up in a torture dungeon. It's not Mass Effect where, your ship gets blown up and then Commander Shepard has to be like, reconstructed and is fighting some sort of existential threat. It's not Dragon Age Origins where you find like an orcish equivalent of the Master from Fallout. If anyone played Origins, there is literally basically an insert character that is just like the Master from Fallout. Basically a fleshy, gross construction of a boss that exists in Origins. Origins and Dragon Age in particular was meant to be edgy, and it's just not anymore. It's been sterilized. Sterilized in terms of the visuals, sterilized in terms of the writing, and that is basically causing people to have very dissenting opinions on the quality of that game. Very dissenting opinions.
Good morning, Miss Layla.
Why, good morning, Oliver.
Me personally,
Your breakfast over
I've been
there,
gaming since the 90s, so I've seen it all, right?
almost forgot.
I've seen every
Philip found
generation
you. He said
that
he had
matters,
something to show
dating
you.
back to the Genesis.
Really? So he finally finished
I've
it,
seen
huh?
every
Do you
era
know
of
where
PC
he is
gaming
right now?
since,
He just stepped
Thief
out with some
and Days
deliveries
Ex
for
and
me.
System Shock 2,
doubt he'll have
and
gotten
all of
far.
these things I've
Thanks, Miss
seen and been a
Layla.
part of.
Oh, say hi to your mother for me.
Sure thing, Miss Layla.
So, in terms of where I land, I do think that the PS2 was obviously the best console ever,
Hey,
but a lot of Xbox
here.
360, PS3 titles, I've kind of developed a new appreciation for. And that kind of brings us full circle to Ni no Kuni, right? Ni no Kuni was a PS3 title with graphics designed by Studio Ghibli, which is an anime company.
Good thing
And
you
it just
found
turns out that the
So what-
visuals, similar
else
to
would it be,
Valkyria
dum-dum?
Chronicles, which we already looked at,
Boy, you were...
hold up exceptionally
else?
well. Right? You're not getting God
Sure,
rays
sure. You
and
go
ray
last.
tracing
Well,
and
I-
particle effects.
Okay.
You're
Sure.
not even getting
Okay.
proper lighting reflections.
Sure.
All the shadows are baked in. All of that is true, but for some reason this game still looks great.
So, this is the child.
I think the only live casted shadows would be the ones coming from the character models. Everything else is baked in to the scene.
The Dark Jin's power alone. will not suffice.
I fear not.
What is the child's name?
So it is an instance,
Oliver.
or it is a case, in my opinion, that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. If you have the power to, realistically have all the lighting in a scene be essentially calculated and casted in real time, you can do that in games now. There is no reason for a level designer to say, okay, this shadow right here, this shadow of the signpost, there's no reason for a level designer to basically bake in that lighting. And then the sun is somewhere over here, right? And they put the sun in the scene and it's way up in the top right of the level or something. And all of the shadows are essentially rendered in based on that, pre-lighting calculation of where the sun is. Gaming today, all of that stuff's calculated in real time. The sun is moving in the sky. All the shadows are developed dynamically. They're not rendered in. But it's funny because sometimes it looks worse. Like, just because something can be, Unreal Engine 5 doesn't mean it's a better looking game. I'm thinking specifically like, did you ever play Dark Souls with guns? I think it's called Remnant from the Ashes. So Remnant from the Ashes was never really meant to be a graphical powerhouse. And then with the sequel, they went Unreal Engine 5. And it didn't even look better. They decided to upgrade the graphics engine, make the game much bigger in terms of its install size. But then visually, it's like, I can't tell if this is Unreal Engine 5 or UE4. Like, it still looked below average. And I feel that way about a lot of game development right now with this current generation, where it's hard to tell if the games actually look better, objectively speaking. They're obviously more advanced in terms of their lighting calculations. They're more advanced in terms of the number of particles they can have on screen at any given time. All the spells and effects are super
Mom.
shiny.
I got the groceries.
Like, in this scene right here,
Just
the only
put them on the
particle
table,
effect
will you?
is literally the vapor rising. That's it. It's very constrained to the cooking scene that we're seeing right now. Only particles on screen right now.
Mom, did you say something, sweetie? You're kind of busy tomorrow, huh?
Well, now that you mention it, I do have to practice for my concert in the morning.
And then obviously
Oh,
these
yeah?
character models are very
So,
basic,
you'll be in bed
very
kinda
anime-esque.
Huh?
Yes, I suppose I will.
But yeah, I'm of the opinion that these 360 PS3 games were like that
Well,
perfect
you
middle
said
ground
being so
between graphical
mysterious and
fidelity
eat your
and
breakfast.
nostalgia bait,
You'll be
you
late
know.
for school.
Obviously, PS2 games,
before
you
you
have to
swallow
play
it.
them at like 720p, maybe even 480p in some cases, like really low resolutions for these old PS2 games. And obviously, we're getting nothing but remakes for
Thanks
these
for
PS2
breakfast,
games.
Mom.
Silent Hill 2 remake, Metal Gear Solid 3 remake.
See you later, Mom.
Bye, sweetie. You be good
There's
now.
been so many lately that I'm literally blanking on the
will.
number of PS2 remakes we've had. They're remaking The Thing, that, kind of AA PS2 game that was kind of janky and awful, but it was interesting in terms of what it was trying to do. They're remaking The Thing for PS2, right? Everything's getting remade. Soul Reaver is getting remade. Everything gets a remake. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, everything gets a remake. But I'm actually of the opinion that in terms of the gameplay on display, that the PS2 era is not necessarily the best at everything. Sure, Silent Hill 2 was an amazing game. Yes, Metal Gear Solid 3, one of my personal favorite games ever made. That doesn't necessarily mean that I want to just relive my 13-year-old gaming library in my 30s. Not necessarily at all. I think it's far more interesting to approach gaming in a more holistic sense. You're playing AA games, you're playing indie games, you're playing games from the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, and you're mixing that in with your nostalgia bait PS2 titles that you remember and love. Would I play an HD remake for Fatal Frame 2? Probably not. I don't need that. I can just play the original and be happy with what it was. Fatal Frame 2 being one of the best survival horror games ever made. That doesn't really need a remake. I don't need more particle effects and a higher resolution to make Japanese ghosts seem scarier. It's not going to make my life any better. Now, back to the RL stuff. I did go down to Toronto to see the office for this company I was applying at. I did the final interview in person. I saw some yellow flags in terms of the way the company's being run that I'm not super fond of. I've always worked in like a very scrappy way. Like that's just my life. Is like I create deliverables and work outcomes, and I manage staff, and I do all these things without express knowledge of how to do them. Like it's just very scrappy, very sweat of my brow, elbow grease, hard work, and chutzpah, and asserting myself into situations and learning as I go. And that's how I've done work in the past
Sorry,
as a
my
marketer.
mom just wouldn't go to bed.
So, is it finished?
Sure is. The last bearing's in, and she's
But,
primed for action.
if there
Wanna
are
see?
too many yellow flags
Do
in a
I
certain
ever?
situation,
All right.
you might have to draw the line, even if it is double your salary. Like, it's
Here
just
goes
money,
nothing.
right? If there are circumstances about the job that you don't like, that doesn't mean that you immediately sell yourself for twice your salary.
You betcha.
But some people would,
So
right? Some people would
The
just
new
kind of turn a
Coupe
blind eye to
DLC
everything
got
that would be
nothing on us, Ollie.
awkward or irritating about the role,
It's not even
and they would just take the
close.
money. Because you need money. You need
So,
money for a mortgage. You need money
you
to
ready to
get
hit
your
the road,
dental
kiddo?
done. You need money to buy groceries. You need money to buy gas. People just like money in general. I think that's a pretty safe statement in a post-capitalist society. People just like money, and they're not nearly as concerned about where they get it from or how they got it or whether they even deserve it. They just take the money and run. So I'm finding myself in that awkward position right now where I might be receiving an offer after the weekend. And it could be a sizable salaried offer, very sizable. But there are things about the job that I might not like, objectively speaking. Yellow flags. Not red flags, but yellow, certainly. And lots of them. Going back to gaming, talking about Ni no Kuni specifically.
Coast is clear.
If you're not familiar with this
I better go
title,
so far.
it is
Let's go.
essentially a JRPG. Well, it's like
that?
Pokemon,
Please,
but it's
Oliver.
baked into like a
Don't
turn-based
go.
JRPG shell. So instead of just like your Pokemon fights that Pokemon,
Who are you?
you
How
have
do
your
you know my
Pokemon,
name?
but then you also have your JRPG
Ollie,
character models.
What's taking you
You're
so
controlling
long?
both at
I'm
the same
sorry,
time.
Phil.
You're controlling the Pokemon and what it
sorry.
does.
Oh,
You're
man.
also controlling,
Who was it?
Oh,
your
that girl.
protagonist and what he's doing at the same time.
What are you talking
And
about?
in that case, it's actually a very unique title.
There's nobody there.
And obviously, the art style is
That's
beautiful.
weird.
Like I could look at
She
this
was
like
right
just
there.
forever. Like
A girl.
there's nothing about this
A
title that
girl,
I'm like,
huh?
this looks
I bet it was that
antiquated.
dumb Starry
You know,
Berry.
those
no,
brickwork
couldn't be.
back
She's
there
not
looks
allowed out.
bad. No, those bricks in the back look
You
great.
must be going screwy
And the
or
character models are
something.
basic, and the
Anyway,
lighting
come on.
engine is
Oh,
basic, and
okay.
but it does everything it needs to do. But then, yeah, you look at something like Dragon Age Veilguard, and it's just like,
Oliver.
let's get the water reflections shining on the
boy who will
floor.
save
So
the
shiny
world.
floors are big in this gen.
But unfortunately,
The floors always have to be reflective.
his light is
Tile
usually a
reflects
candle
light,
in the black.
marble reflects light, wood reflects light. Everything is shiny. Everything has baked in light reflections. The mirrors don't work. You don't have real-time reflections in that sense, but the lighting engine is working. So you can reflect light in real time, just not in your character model. All the floors are so shiny. The walls are shiny, the ceiling's shiny, everything's shiny. And then you have, in this world that is everything is shiny, and the character models are basically the same level of detail we had on the PS3 or Xbox 360. Then you just add a layer of particle effects over top of it. So you have your spell effects, your ability effects, and it's a lot.
Must die.
You look at something like Ni no Kuni, and it's so minimalistic in its presentation. It's like a watercolor painting. It's beautiful in its simplicity. We got a little bit of, God rays coming in through the window, and that's it. Just the most basic of lighting that you need to sell this scene. That's it. Very basic. And in that sense, it is perfect as a matte painting.
Sweetie?
Matte being a kind of paint that you use that does not reflect light.
Where
And
are
I
you?
think what I would want to see out of this current generation of gaming is more hard stylistic choices. Like, yes, we can do all this ray tracing. Yes, we can add particle effects on top of God rays, on top of shiny floors. All of that can be baked into the scene at once because we have infinite, hard drive space, and we have infinite processing power, and we can essentially just jam all this into a scene with no,
Well, now that you mention it,
no restrictions.
I do have to practice for my concert.
Meanwhile, old games were developed
Oh, yeah?
with a lot of restrictions in mind
you'll
that
be
actually
made
made
fun
the
of.
games better.
Oliver.
So what I'd like to see is that more of this next gen of gaming to essentially
Oliver.
push the brakes on the visual, oh god, my eyes, I can't even see what's happening on screen anymore. Push the brakes on that, like pump the brakes, and focus on a distinct visual style that works for your video game, right? I'm going to build a Fallout-style world where everything is browns and grays, and it's in the desert, and it's not pretty to look at, but it really sells how grimy everything is. Or I'm going to build a JRPG where everything looks like a watercolor painting, and it's made by Studio Ghibli. Or, I'm going to build a Spyro the Dragon, where in that instance, in a Spyro game or a children's game, it would make sense for the visuals to be as over the top and exaggerated as you want to make them, right? Make the visual orgasm for the kids. It's like a moving Disney production. It's a moving Pixar production that is interactive for the player. Do that for the children specifically. For the 30-year-olds who have been gaming since the 90s, we can handle a little bit of darkness in our games. We can handle more advanced or less advanced lighting engines. We can handle fewer particle effects on screen if it's actually making the game look better. Sometimes less is more. It's a very specific, simple idea in any sort of creative process, whether it is graphic design, whether it is video production, whether it is game production. Sometimes less is more. And that brings us again full circle to Ni no Kuni. This game screams less is more. So of course this is the very sad scene where our main protagonist gets his sort of
Oliver.
come to age story.
Oliver, wake up.
So yeah, this is, a Studio Ghibli production, so of course the mom's gonna die. Like, you basically know instantly that the mom is gonna be like an angelic figure, she's gonna be so amazing and perfect. But then yeah, she's gonna die relatively soon in the video
I
game.
think you two have had quite enough excitement for one day.
Yes, ma'am.
And then, of course, when the mom dies, you get to go on a fantasy adventure.
Whatever will you children get up to next?
Allie,
Yeah, and then so her heart condition like immediately kicks in after she saves her son from drowning. It's like, oh, so perfect in its execution.
Mom! Here! I'll fetch the doctor. Mom!
Oliver, sweetie.
And to be honest, the less is more mentality can apply to running a company as well. Again, the office that I went to, they have they're aiming for like global saturation, and they have all these international agencies and all these distinct international offices that they're all very small, and they're all nothing to look at. They're essentially mailing addresses and postal codes and a few desks and a few computers. Meanwhile, if they went with the less is more mentality, they might really hone in on what the company does well and focus on building a strong company infrastructure. But no, everyone's, more is more. That's the way everyone looks at everything. It's the way they look at their jobs. It's the way they look at investing. It's the way they look at designing a video game. It's just get it all out there as much as we can, and it's going to work if we just, overwhelm people's senses. And I don't necessarily agree with that.
But shorn of his mother's love, to whom can he now turn for guidance? And soon he will come to our world, where our powers are strongest.
Very good, Your Radiance.
So yeah, if you haven't had a chance to play the original Ni no Kuni, I highly recommend it. If only for the art style, even if you don't care about like the Pokemon combat system. It's so beautiful to look at, even like 10 years from when it was released. A full decade after, it looks better than like most AAA games today. It looks good in engine, and it also looks good in the cutscenes.
I'll just leave it here for you, okay, dearie?
So I do find that there is an increasing interest in AA and indie titles because they can really hone in on distinct visual styles. They can hone in on very specific
You'll just
gameplay
have to wait
ideas.
until dinner
They can
to
essentially satiate the more,
He's been in there 3
I
whole
would say,
days now.
conservative audience, or the more, essentially the audience that would be described as a gaming connoisseur, like people that have been around for a long time, have been consuming the medium for a long time. They're going to have more restrictive tastes in the way that a game gets made.
I'm sure he'll look after you very well.
They want the writing to sound a certain way. They want the visuals to look a certain way. They want the gameplay to feel a certain way. They want all of these things. And you're more likely to find it now in the AA or indie scene than you are in AAA video game production.
Just come back soon.
So obviously a video game that I'm looking forward to would be like Stalker 2. That's a AA title. I'm thinking that that's going to be very good.
Always.
I just finished Metro Exodus recently. That was a AA game that I thought was very, very good. And there is a new Metro title coming out actually as well. So yeah, like, you look at this introduction to Ni no Kuni, and like, the whole idea of like fantasy as grief metaphor is so perfectly envisioned here. The boy loses his mom, and then his, favorite stuffed toy immediately comes to life.
What just happened?
Fantasy as a way of processing
You just
grief.
witnessed the rebirth of Drippy,
Very
Lord
simple.
High, Lord of the Fairies.
Who?
What, are you deaf or something? Drippy, Lord High, Lord of the Fairies, I said, didn't I?
Drippy.
That's right, and I'm sick to the teeth of you a snivelling and moaning. A proper crybaby bunting you are. 3 days, man. I mean, I've been sad before, but crying for 3 whole days? I'm surprised there's a drop of water left in you. You're a big boy, man. 3 days is, well, it's unheard of.
What?
I think the kid's allowed to grieve his mom for more than 3 days if he wants to. But of course, we've gotta do the fantasy adventure thing now. So we get that beautiful introduction of what it's like to live in this small town, in this sort of I don't know, soft steampunk world. Like, it's not like there's no pipes and steam, but obviously they were able to make a motor car, which is pretty advanced for a small town. Even if the thing did, crash. By the fireplace, they said. There is a magic book. By the fireplace.
What could be hidden in a place like this?
A mighty spell book.
Huh? A book? But it would burn in there.
Not this book. The wizard's companion laughs in the face of fire. Wouldn't be much of...
Like, even just like this little UI element here is beautifully drawn, right? It's like it translates to all elements of the game. You have the in-engine stuff, you have the cutscenes, and then you have the UI elements. And in that way, it's not too different from like a Persona title, where I think it was Atlas that like really popularized unifying your art style for a video game. Right? The menus are beautiful to look at. The combat UI is beautiful to look at. The cutscenes are beautiful to look at. Like, that's typically the thing you see with, it's a book. So that's the thing that people love about Atlas games.
Magic in our way over to my world, is it? Now let's see.
But yeah, we also have it here in this kind of Studio Ghibli JRPG, right? I don't know how else to describe it because they did the artwork for it. But yeah, the thing you'll learn about me is that while I love my PS2 nostalgia bait, I love my turn-of-the-century PC games, your Days Ex, your System Shock 2, I'm also very respective of some of the hard work that went into PS3 and Xbox 360 titles. Obviously, like, the first launch game for the PS5 was basically Demon's Souls again, right? Like, it was Demon's Souls remake for the PS5. Like, that's just a PS3 game that I played on the PS3. It's like, yeah, it's a good game. It was good back then, it's good now. The other thing I like about the Xbox 360 PS3 era is that there were a lot of new IPs. People took risks. Like, obviously, Ni no Kuni as a series, after the first title, kind of tapered off. Like, it kind of failed, right? Because the other games didn't have Studio Ghibli working on them, and you kind of need that to make a Studio Ghibli game. Yeah, so we're kind of working our way towards the fantasy world, the actual heart of the game.
You're the little girl I met.
Yeah, I got a stick. The stick being your sword, you know, to start with. I'm not even sure if Ollie ever gets, like, a sword. Like, I think he gets wands to beat on people with, but he's never much of a combat guy. He's always distinctly a kid, right? It'd be weird if he, like, started whipping out guns or swords. Like, that's not what he does. He casts spells, he fights with Pokemon.
Normal people can't see magic, see? Go on, Ollie boy. Cast Gateway.
I also like how his spellbook is both a narrative element and a gameplay element.
That's it, man. You got it.
Like, if it was just the Pokemon thing by itself, the game would be really boring, but the fact that you have these spells as well, it adds an extra element that is good for the narrative, and it's good for the gameplay as well. Beautiful, right? Absolutely beautiful.
Tiny!
What is it? Stop that now. Heel, boy. Heel.
Told you, they didn't notice
And you know, it gives you this little subtle hint that, you know, perhaps what Ollie's seeing is actually somewhat real because the dog is reacting to it. It's not real enough that adults can see it, but, you know, it is real in a sense.
And we're off to another world!
Hey, wait for me!
And there you go. That's kind of the introduction of the game. We'll take a very, very fast look at, like, the combat, and this is gonna be a longer video, I think, because that even just that introduction was dragging. But I do want to very quickly get into the meat and potatoes of the game if I can. Here we go.
Let's do it!
Boop, 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 boop. I still remember that. Boop, 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 boop. Smack him, kid. Ah, I'm gonna smack you with my stick. So they haven't introduced it yet, but the main point of this combat is you actually fight with your Pokemon, because as you can see, Ollie is exceptionally weak in melee combat. He's a spellcaster. Although the two other party members you get added, you only get two other ones. They're not really good in combat either, so you shouldn't really fight with your characters at all. It is a Pokemon-style game.
Nice one, Ollie boy.
Jeepers creepers.
So it doesn't take long before you can start capturing the monsters you beat, and then training them up in terms of their level. And of course leveling them up to different variants that have different abilities. Oh, I forgot how nice this looks. The other thing I liked about the Xbox 360 PS3 era of JRPGs is that they still had overworld maps. I don't know when it was that companies decided that they just didn't need overworld maps anymore, but you look at Ni no Kuni, Tales of Vesperia, well, those are really the two big ones that were actually good that generation, and they had proper overworld maps. But yeah, this is so beautiful. Like, I would call this like, you think about Fallout, right? You leave the vaults and then the whole world is in front of you. I don't consider this that different from that in terms of like that first time you see the overworld is massive. So beautiful. So beautiful 10 years on. And it's insane. Yeah, so this is the kind of thing I mean where it's like, if they did a remake of Final Fantasy X, I'd probably play it. Right? That's the kind of game that I think could actually use a graphical upgrade. Because when Final Fantasy X was released, it was actually meant to be a visual spectacle. It was a real hardware pusher at the time. And yeah, Tidus will need to get re-voice acted because he's so irritating. But, yeah, I would think that a lot of the visuals of Final Fantasy X and the distinct style that that game had would translate very well to a graphical upgrade. So yeah, FF10, FF9, FF8, FF7's been done to death. So for ignore 7, we've had way too much 7. I would take FF8, I'd take FF9, I'd take FF10, possibly FF12, with a distinct graphical upgrade. And then, of course, any JRPG that was good and had a proper overworld like this, I would 100% support a graphical upgrade. Because right now we have basically PS3, Xbox 360 era JRPGs that have been slightly remastered, and they have proper overworlds, so Tales of Vesperia and then Ni no Kuni being the two that come to mind for me. And then a lot of modern Final Fantasy games just don't. They think it's too much work to have a proper overworld. Too graphically intensive to have a top-down overworld like this. Isometric. It's very important that your open world be isometric. It's so beautiful, it's so distinct, and it's so satisfying, and it will be, I think, pretty much forever. But yeah, that's a little taste of Ni no Kuni, a little taste of mid-gen gaming that I think needs to be remembered. This is Eternal King, signing out.